Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 14th of December 2023. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key to the map on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. As normal, we will start in the northeastern sector or axis going from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. You can see here that there are only a few pins on the map compared to the last few days. Not as many changes to the mapping. Most of them are indeed Russian changes, so as in Russia has made some gains here and there. We're going to go to the north up near Syka, which is just here, northeast of Kupiansk, and Ivanivka Yahidny, which is over here. First of all, let's go to Syka, where the Russians have been pummeling the town. According to null reports here, fairly large attack north of Syka, Kharkiv region. Russians attacked Ukrainian positions with armoured vehicles, tanks and infantry. Ukrainian fighters can be seen repelling the attack from close distance. So there is a lot of activity going on there. As you can see from this, there is quite a bit of armour being used here. These are columns of fairly substantial pieces of kit. So the Russians are definitely putting quite a bit of effort into attacking up in this area, as has been kind of threatened for a long time, and as we've seen from the different map changes over the last week or two. So it's Syka under a lot of pressure. It has been pummeled by, as I said yesterday, all sorts of ordnance, and it seems that they are attacking in that area with columns. And going to the east to the Ivanivka area, according to Syriac maps, pro-Russian mapper, Russian army has recaptured again the positions east of Ivanivka. Recaptured again, recaptured. So that goes to show that it is a kind of bit of back and forth there, I guess. So activity up in the very northern area of the front line. Continued activity going on all the way down here. Yet again, I'm not going to dip into the ISW in great detail or any other detailed analysis just for time. I've done quite a bit of content today. We're going to come down to this northern part of the Bakhmut region. So we go up from Bakhmut north to Paraskevivka and along the road past Solidar to Sakai Vanseti, this small village here. We can see that according to Syriac maps, the Russians have made some successful incursions into Ukrainian-controlled territory there. Here they say that the Russian army has advanced north of Sakai Vanseti, crossing the Vasyukivka River. And obviously that's slightly significant in that the line before had been around the meandering river. Then actually the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back here. And then you've got the Bakhmutivka River just going along here. But there's another kind of meandering part of tributary to that river here. And you've got the Vasyukivka River. The different rivers acting as different natural barriers. But the Russians had been pushed back behind the Vasyukivka River and now have supposedly pushed the Ukrainians back in that very northern part of the front line in this area. Of course, that's coming from just one source. We'll see whether that pans out in the coming days. As for the rest of Bakhmut, not a great deal of movement in terms of changes of territory. So we'll come down past there. That's not to say there isn't huge amounts of activity taking place. There is, of course. We're going to look at Horlivka, where this is these huge tailings or spoils heaps, where the Ukrainians had taken this particularly tall, prominent one back, and they stuck a flag on top of it, and that's where you can see this kind of bridgehead there, this salient going into the Russian territory. According to Syriac maps, in this particular area, they have all of that now under Russian control, and that one being taken back. The situation in Horlivka, the Russian army has recovered the last hill, which was taken by the Ukrainian army 4 weeks ago. Actually, it wasn't 4 weeks ago. It was just the other day they retook it and shoved a flag on top of it with visual evidence there. So I don't know whether they had kind of taken it in a sense 4 weeks ago as well, but just not quite accurate, I would say, what Surrey Maps is saying there. But nonetheless, claims that the Russians have equalized this front line along here and have all of those hills under their control. Tim White said this morning, though, another small success for Ukraine's army in Donetsk is being reported. Just as near Holivka yesterday, Ukraine says it's won another slag heap, this time near Toretsk. So, irrespective of what has or hasn't happened there, we have Toretsk, which is fairly nearby to here. Let's go and find that. So we are coming further. Where are you, Toretsk? I'm going to go and find this particular place. Straight in front of my face. Indeed, exactly where we were anyway, which is here, Toretsk. So another slag heap around this area. I don't know where, but apparently it has been taken by the Ukrainians. There's no detail to that, no provenance for Tim White's claim. So I'd be interested to see what that pertains to. So anyway, activity around there, possibly for both sides, a success for both sides. Now, as we come down to Avdiivka, we can see that a couple of the mappers agreeing that there are some gains for the Russians around the Stepova, just north of Stepova area, and indeed inside the village itself. As I said yesterday, the entire village is now contested. Half of the village, I mean, everyone admits here that half the village is controlled at least by the Russians, and it's this area to the north and a little bit along the railway where they're expanding their control. Both Deep State Map and Surrey Maps claiming that that is the case in that area. We have, no actual claims to that area on the Surrey Maps' tweets, actually, which is quite interesting. But nonetheless, some gains there. Nothing particular in terms of other areas around here and territorial control shifting. But no reports does talk about the industrial zone to the southeast of Avdiivka, where Russia has slightly improved its positions, as according to them, Ukrainian forces still maintain presence in the area south and southwest of it, although it is less prominent than before. So that's this area that you can see with the dark red there. Although there's indications from null reports that the Ukrainians are attacking towards Opitny along in this direction. Now, here there is, oh no, it's not there. Let me see if I can find it. Actually, I've just seen another source. Right, here it is. Here's Barracuda here saying the Russian forces heavily shelling the village of Severny in the west of Avdiivka with Grad rockets here. So it's getting an absolute pummeling. This is the sort of thing that Russia do very often, using an awful lot of multiple launch rockets. Now, with these, and we've seen this up in Sinkivka, we've seen it where else? In around Avdiivka, as you can see here. And I think possibly up in the Bodanivka area, they've been using a lot of MLRS there. These are not particularly accurate. I've said this for a long time. Andrew Perpetual was talking about this on his live stream the other night. And you wonder, when you see all these pockmarks, really, is it worth using these? You know, all of these holes all over the place, and you're thinking, well, what's the percentage hit rate for these particular munitions? But of course, if you're sending repeated barrages over, you can send like hundreds and hundreds of these, and eventually some of them are going to find their mark. So it's like a scattergun approach to hammering the enemy. And they will also have quite a psychological effect as well. I mean, hearing these whistle over and hit, you know, time and time again is not going to do much for your psyche. Nonetheless, you know, I don't think they're particularly accurate. But if you use them enough, as I say, they can be fairly effective. And that is Severny over here. So it's these fields around here and around this. No longer be much of a village there, but it's this area that is getting hammered by the MLRS systems, or MLRS, because the S stands for system. So MLRS system. Right, anyway, I digress. Moving on, we're going to come to Marinka next, where here we have no reports being quite negative, and rightly so, about Marinka. Although General Tarnavsky reports that attacks are repelled in and near Marinka, geolocated footage shows Russian presence both in remaining parts north and south considered under Ukrainian control. This means Marinka, or better to say its remains or ruins, is likely lost. Now, on the one hand, yeah, I mean, Marinka pretty much is lost. However, this is exactly what I was talking about yesterday, which is to say that he's really talking about this area and this area, which, although Andrew Perpetua is yet to move his mapping forward in the northern area, that is basically understood to be under Russian control, the kind of areas that Noel Reports was talking about there. But it's worth remembering that Marinka actually goes all the way up to this crossing here of these kind of two reservoirs, or the bit in between them. So this is all still Marinka, and this is Marinka for what it's worth. Now, I know that's just a technicality. Really, Marinka has fallen and is lost, but they will still be fighting there because, as I explained yesterday, Marinka's importance is in terms of these towns behind there, Kurakova particularly, and how logistically important they are and infrastructurally important. It's interesting that Surat Maps has a change to the area around Pobjeda. I don't really talk about it in their mapping, as in there's no tweet to go alongside that. This is probably an acceptance that they've been wrong around Pobjeda for bloomin' ages. Andrew Perpetua's explicitly said that, I think, when I spoke to him previously, because Surat Maps had the Russians inside Pobjeda and in controlling this agricultural establishment there, and they've had that for basically a couple of months now, and yet Andrew Perpetua's never put the Russians up that far, and then just gradually you just see it being walked back, but not really talked about. So I think that's begrudging acceptance that evidence is now showing that the Russians never were there, and this is another one. I think Surat Maps is being somewhat correct when the Russians are on big attacks and whatnot, like they are at the moment, and they'll kind of herald a lot of those claims, but they also have a tendency, or he has a tendency, to put Russian control, as I've said a number of times, when there's just one element of the Russians in a position. So it might be a single human being or an APC driving there. Right, the Russians control that. And that's not always the case, right? And so there are attacks that are repelled. There are reconnaissance, units moving through areas. There are remnants of Russian forces or Ukrainian forces that remain after they've basically been decimated or whatever. That doesn't mean that one side controls it or the other side controls it or whatever. These things need kind of consistency over time and evidence, and that's the sort of thing that Andrew Perpetua does. Is he's conservative in his mapping and builds up a picture much more conservatively, but you're much more sure in the sort of things he claims, whereas often at the moment, Surat Maps is correct in some of these Russian attacks, but not all the time. And I think this is one that's for a long time been incorrect. Anyway, coming down south from where am I? Marinka. We pass pretty much all of the southern front line. There are no reported changes to the mapping here, although there will still be activity. We keep a keen eye on the Robotyne area, where the Russians have had some success in pushing back the Ukrainians in and around around Kopani, further pushing to the east towards Robotyne, and that's annoyingly where the Ukrainians had previous success. So this had been most of their joy in the Robotyne area had recently come from here, and they seem to have lost most of that gained territory in short order. But nonetheless, no changes over the last 24 hours. We come to Kinky and the Dnipro River sector. No changes, as you can see there. We're going to pop into Noel Reports to see what Noel Reports says about Kinky. And actually, before we get to what Putin says there, Noel Reports did report 20 hours ago that Russian sources claim a counterattack coming from the forest area and the eastern outskirts is ongoing. Ukrainian units would have reportedly retreated to the center. This all needs further confirmation. Russian sources also claim that Ukrainians brought in new troops, and we heard that the other day as well. So what happened overnight? Well, Putin lied about Kinky, so I'm just going to establish that first. So Putin, in his big telethon, where he's been on TV, I think for 3 or 4 hours answering questions, and it's pretty farcical. One of the things he said is a pocket has been created in the territory of the bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnipro in Kinky. The Ukrainian bridgehead was purely created for media support and only for political reasons. I would strongly disagree with that. I'd say that if they can get a successful bridgehead there and move it and expand it, it becomes an incredibly problematic front for the Russians. He said, I ordered the general staff not to rush to push out the enemy in order to preserve the pocket and continue to destroy the enemy. It's an interesting bit of narrative, and you can maybe even argue it has some rationale behind it. He's saying, yeah, we haven't pushed them out of Kinky yet because I told them not to push them out of Kinky. Oh, that's convenient. And in fact, we want them there because we can attrit them in place. Actually, that is something they can do. Now, whether that's what they're actually planning or whether that's what's called a post hoc rationalization, so an after the fact rationalization, it's like, dang, we're having trouble getting them out of Kinky, and our own troops are complaining it's really tough, and our counter battery fire is non-existent. We're struggling with drone superiority in the area. Our stuff is getting blown up. So let's claim that this allows us to attrit the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are being attritted there, so it is painful for the Ukrainians as well. But is that the actual reason that they are not pushing the Ukrainians out there? I would argue not. I'd argue that it definitely is a post-hoc rationalization. But he also added, there was another claim that he said that there were only 6 wounded soldiers, which is incredibly specific, in Kinky. This is evidently nonsense. So Andrew Perpetua says, I've had all my vehicle files split into daily files, which is getting annoying to search through, so I'm combining them into one file. I've not split the damaged, destroyed, abandoned yet, but the image around Kinky is amusing. So this is his combined kind of database, if you like, for destroyed, damaged, or abandoned vehicles of the Russians around Kinky. So these are all the blue dots. The Russians have lost all of those vehicles around Kinky. As I've said previously, Kinky is like a Vuhledar 2.0, 3.0, because you've got Avdiivka is a 2.0. Maybe this is a 3.0. The Russians are losing huge amounts of equipment there. Now, if you're telling me that all of that equipment getting blown up constitutes 6 wounded Russians, then you're living on cloud cuckoo. And Putin is just lying to the general public. But it's interesting that the UK intelligence today said in early December 2023, the newly formed 104th Guards Airborne Division, 104 GAD of the VDV, Russia's airborne forces, highly likely suffered exceptionally heavy losses and failed to achieve its objective during its combat debut in Kherson Oblast. In other words, the UK intelligence is saying the Russians have been absolutely hammered there. Now, does this fit in line with Putin saying a pocket has been created and it's only political, and I ordered the general staff not to rush to put out the enemy in order to preserve the pocket and continue to destroy the enemy, when it's very clear that the Russians themselves are getting hammered? I don't think so. So I think that really is a post-hoc rationalization that has no basis in fact. The operation took place after the division joined Russia's Dnipro group of forces and its attempt to dislodge the Ukrainian bridgehead near the village of Kinky on the east bank of the Dnipro. 104 GAD was reportedly poorly supported by air power and artillery, while many of the troops were highly likely inexperienced. Following the incident, Russian mill bloggers called on the Dnipro group of forces commander, Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky, to resign. This is a blow to Teplinsky's reputation as one of the more capable Russian field commanders in the war. In his routine role, he is also the general commander of the VDV. So Teplinsky is in charge of the VDV, the airborne forces, the paratroopers, but he's also in charge of this area. And he has been routinely criticized by the troops fighting here for doing nothing and making bad decisions, and the Russians getting hammered. So all of this points to this is a very painful area for the Russians. However, I also think it's quite painful for the Ukrainians. I'm not denying that. And they are rotating in troops and moving their injured out. And they are, those fresh troops are having a hard time. And they are failing to expand this bridgehead in a meaningful way. And that's been the case for quite a long time. But if you just put in Kinky into to Twitter, for example, or Telegram, I'm sure, you just look at the losses that the Russians have been suffering, and some of these are videos from Russians themselves. You've got FPV drones blowing up Russian troops. You've got dead bodies. You've got all the usual kind of stuff that you see on Twitter, and you can just be rest assured that Putin is lying to the Russian people when he is saying what he says. Okay, so just as if you didn't know that, but for those pro-Kremlin voices in the threads, Putin is a liar. Just in case you didn't know, he's a liar. But again, it hasn't moved there too much for the Ukrainians. We've seen a slight expansion on Andrew Perpetua's mapping over the last week. More of a rejig, but they obviously expanded that at some point. But we haven't really seen anything considerable now for 6 weeks or so there. So question is, as ever, are the Ukrainians attriting the Russians at a higher rate than the Russians are attriting the Ukrainians? And is that ratio the kind of ratio that Ukraine need in order to win the war? I don't know whether that's the case in kinky, but I'm fairly sure it is advantageous for the Ukrainians. Whether it's advantageous enough, I don't know. Anyway, please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you for watching. And I guess I keep forgetting to say this before I go. And sorry for this overt spamming here, but I am going to spam you. If you are bored over Christmas or want to read a book, or after Christmas, or want to get some presents, don't forget I've written some fiction books: The Survival of the Fittest, Metamorphosis and Adaptation, the sequel here. This is the series that I've not yet finished, but if you want to start that series, a couple of you have read these and gave glowing reviews, which I really appreciated. They're on Kindle, beautiful paper, matte paperback. I love these covers. Similar theme in color and cover design is if you've got kids who are, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 15. But these are, I've know adults that have really enjoyed these as well. The Truth Seekers series, a Truth Seeker story, The Curse of the Maya, and the sequel, Grease Lightning, set in the modern times, but looking at historically at the Maya and ancient Greeks, merging modern story. It's a bit like, I love these books, by the way. I love, actually all four of those are great. Blowing my own trumpet there, but actually really enjoyed writing with my co-author with these kids books, because there are elements of philosophy that we're trying to weave in, elements of critical thinking. It's a bit like the X-Files, where you two twins, a boy and a girl, the main protagonists, and one believes conspiracy theories and is all kind of sporty, and the other one is more of a fact-based, science-based thinker and more of a critical thinker. And as twins, you get their relationship together, and it's like Mulder and Scully, but for kids. And finally, I'm not going to bore you with all my philosophy books, but if you like words, I love words, even though I stumble over them all the time. I'm much better at writing them than speaking them. There's a book, The Family Book of Word of the Day, for a year, every year, forever. So you can grab that as well in paperback. That's not available on Kindle because actually the format of that's too difficult to get into Kindle. But if you like words and a bit of history and a bit of humour in there, and you want some more interesting words to use on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, that's your bad boy there. Anyway, that's the spam part of this video done. Who knew I'd spend that long speaking about books? But guys, if you want to support the channel, that's one way you can do it. Would really appreciate feedback on those books as well. If you like them, put the reviews on Amazon or wherever you get them. If you don't like them, little pips.